Howdy, folks, and welcome to the 200th, can you believe it, live stream for ComicBase. Anyway, I'm your host, Pete Bickford, and we have a lot to get through today. It's going to be a really strange one, big announcements coming up. Before we get into it too much, though, I did want to say hi to the folks who are here, and we're going to be taking on the topic of newsstand versions in a big, big way. So big announcements coming up for all ComicBase users, so do stick around for that part. In the meantime, I do want to say hi to the folks who are in here. Richard Scott, apparently feeling a little under the weather. We hope you feel better, but welcome to the show. Ora Viejo, out here from, yes, was it 3 heavy, sloppy, wet, heart attack March snowfalls last night in Minneapolis? Oi, oi, oi. Seems like everyone, I'm getting reports from everywhere. It's like, I want to be at the show, but if the power goes out due to the windstorms that are ripping through the east of the country, don't be too freaked out. We certainly have the wind kicking up around here, and when this is all said and done, I'm gonna have a lot of lumbering to be doing in our in the backyard. Tim Kilbreth checking in from Northern Illinois. Welcome. Mike Beam, Scruffy. See, does it say about newsstand editions? Yep. Well, we'll get to it. Tyler T. Albany from Albany, New York. Department of Comics is in the house. Welcome. We also, of course, have our moderator, Gregory Hecht, is here, so everyone behave yourselves. Randall Paskey, great. Hey, I'm glad you can make it here for once. So this one, it's of great seller interest, I think. And, of course, Stealth DBA, I think I saw in there as well. And I think we got it here. All right, so let's get down to a quick bit of news before we throw in with variants. So on just the unmitigated good things that are happening in ComicBase lately, if you're following the interim build channel, build 2423 is up. We added some new improvements to the importing dialog. It will now automatically line up your fields if you switch your your delimiters between tabs and nearment and so forth. It fixes up the status dialogs, which we somehow managed to screw up in last week's update. If you ever noticed that your download wasn't incrementing its picture count because it was just downloading so damn fast, we got it so it's still damn fast, and it also whizzes the picture count by properly. So we fixed that one up, but we also got it so that it does automatic removal of extraneous near-mint issues after importing and various other points in the program. So if you've ever done some things where you shift a title from one place to another, or you import stuff and you realize that, I've got the new issue I added, but I also have the kind of the placeholder zero quantity near-mint issue that was there beforehand, it'll now get rid of those automatically. And finally, it fixes a problem where if you were changing grades for CGC in the grid, this only applied in the grid because it was doing it properly everywhere else in the program, but if you're doing your condition changes right in the grid for high-value books, so things that were actually had a good value anyway, and you were moving some high-value CGC grades in them, it was using the old-style price calculation to figure out the estimated price on that one, and now that's more uniform now. It's using the new standards that we introduced with ComicBase 2025, so apologies to anyone who got tripped up with that beforehand, but is working properly now. All right, so getting back into things. Oh, and hey, to Ed from Toronto in here. So let's talk about newsstand editions, shall we? Let me bring up my graphics over here so I can get some visual aids for what the heck are we going to be talking about. All right, so let's go over here to this bit, and apologize for the poor quality of some of the graphics here. But if starting in 1976, barcodes started appearing on comic books. It was the UPC-A format. If you as are barcode junkies, which is typically 12 digits, and 2 digits you would have at the end, which would designate typically the month that the comic book was published. And let me go ahead and put myself in the frame here on this one. But starting in 1979 for Marvel, a little bit later for DC, they introduced a new concept in comic book retailing called the direct market. The idea was, once upon a time, we sold comic books and you bought them at about a 20% discount if you were 7-Eleven or whoever else. But the deal was, you didn't get a ton of money for the whole thing. It was just the same as you were getting for your magazines and newspapers and so forth. But anything you didn't sell, you could return at the end of the day, and then they would ship you a little less next time, or a little more if you were selling really good, and so forth. But someone had the brilliant idea of saying, hey, what if we had a special place called a comic store where you could buy comic books, and if you didn't sell them. I guess you'd hold on to them. Maybe you'd sell them as a back issue, as kind of crazy, wacky stuff you want there. You're gonna buy last month's comic book for some reason. Who other than a fanatic would ever be interested in that? But as it turns out, all those comic book collectors were. But what they did is the deal went like this: is like, okay, we're going to sell them to you at this direct market, we'll call it, in your comic store, but you don't get to return them at the end of the day. So if you don't sell them, tough, you got to eat it. But we'll give you like a 60% discount on the high end, at least 50 generally. But it went, if you're a really heavy guy, maybe 60% discount on things, but we don't get to send them back. Well, this had introduced a slight problem for Marvel, DC, and the guys pushing comic books around. Is what happens when the guy with the 7-Eleven goes and decides, hey, I'd like to return my comic books now, and he's not allowed to, or let's say anything other than the guy who with his brand new comic shop. Let's call it, I don't know, like Acre High Comic Books or something. Let's say that he had decided that he was going to buy a bunch of comic books there, and he didn't really shift them and everything, and he'd like to send them back. Well, other than like on the honor system, it was hard to kind of catch him. But you can't let this guy who bought a 50-60% discount return things and get credit, as if he'd bought them at 20% off. So that's a real problem for them. Well, Marvel solved the problem pretty easily by what they did is they made, remember they just started introducing barcodes a few years earlier, back in 76 or so. What they decided to do is they'd put a little slash through the barcode. And let me show an early example of something that looks like that. I think it goes something like that. So let's have a look at Captain America over here. You see down at the bottom left-hand corner, you see there's a black slash through the barcode. This is actually a comic book sold through the early version of the direct market, but it was meant not to ever come back to them, and so they weren't going to, allow you. They had to mark the book in such a way that you couldn't just return it. Now later on, they thought, well, slash is a little ugly. People have lots of questions. What if we just did something else with it? What if we did something like we'll draw a little picture of Spider-Man in the bottom right-hand corner, or we'll draw Captain America's shield, or we'll do the Superman logo, or sometimes you put little advertisements in there, like 30 years of Superman, or who watches the Watchmen. You put little slogans in there. But what thing you would not do in the direct market comic books is you wouldn't put a barcode. Now, this went along for a while, and there are some different variants that popped up over the years. For instance, when Whitman decided we can buy some of these old comic books, from the whole thing and put them out in different, multi-packs and so forth, they did their own markings on the whole thing. You see the W in the upper left-hand corner, you've got the Superman in the bottom, in the bottom left there, and a couple of different variations on this came up over the years. But the common thing is if it had a barcode, it was sold through newsstands, and if it didn't have a barcode, then it was direct market and not returnable. So far so good. We understand where things lie, and we're good to go. Well, that ran on for a number of years. Now, remember back in 1979 when all this stuff started, almost everything was sold through your local 7-Eleven. I mean, there were not a lot of comic book stores in the world. It was a bold new business venture. The idea that I can make a living selling nothing but funny books. Crazy, man. So anyway, like by a factor of like 9-10 to 1, any issue of a comic book that you bought in 1979 was going to be, it's going to have newsstand markings on it, because there weren't many direct market comics sold, throughout the entire world. Now, this equalized by about 1984 or so, give or take, where about half the books were coming in, were sold through comic stores, and half of them were still sold through 7-Elevens and whatnot. But by 1991 or so, it had really dropped off. At that point, you'd almost reversed the averages. It was about 1 in 10 that were sold on the newsstand. Newsstands really weren't super profitable at that point for comic books. They were getting shoved out of there, and the comic books were really taking over the trade. And by the end of 1991, Diamond Comic Distribution dropped the hammer. They said, look, comic books without barcodes are just a pain in the ass for us. And so we're going to say, look, anything you want to distribute through us has got to have a barcode. And so at that point, the little pictures of Spider-Man went away. If you are, again, follow barcodes and are a real aficionado of these things, what comic publishers would do then is they put in a new barcode format called EAN 13, which is very, very similar to UPC. The same ideas. The first 6 digits connote the type of good and the publisher, and the next 5 digits after that connote the series. But all the action is in the it's called the supplemental, the digits that follow the main barcode. Now, what they did for comic books that were especially sold through the direct distribution channel is they didn't just have the same 2 digits there, which would connote the month. So if you look at, say, Captain America 189 and Captain America 201, they're both published in the same month, and so they would have an identical barcode if they still had the old UPCA +2 barcode format. But in this brand new scheme of comic books that was starting in the summer of 1991 with the EAN 13 +5 supplemental, then used 5 digits at the end, and the first 3 of those were typically, they would connote the issue number. The digit after that would connote any kind of variation, and the digit after that would connote a printing. And so there was meaning for all 5 digits of that, which, by the way, if you ever have trouble scanning a barcode and you're wondering what's going wrong, typically the problem that's going on is that your barcode scanner is picking up the main code, so it knows what publisher and title it theoretically could be, but without getting that supplemental information, it has no chance in hell of finding the exact issue. And so that's just the limitations of the code at that point. Well, so let's go back to our friend, the direct market and the newsstand. Now, okay, so at this point, everything's got a barcode. Not too many people are squinting very hard at the barcode. If you were squinting really hard at the barcode, you might have noticed that the ones that were sold through the newsstand still, they either had, they were typically still using the UPCA format. So it would still use only 2 digits for the supplemental at the end to connote the month and so forth, whereas the direct market ones had 5 digits, EAN 13 +5. And also more typically, they would also start saying things like, direct market, stamp it right down there in the barcode area. But at a glance, at least, it wasn't as easy as saying, well, this is the one with Spider-Man, this is the one with the barcode, and so I know which one's which. So who the hell cares? I mean, and this is the valid question, because for years and years after this stopped being a thing, where everyone was, was buying comic books throughout this whole era, no one really gave much of a rip whether they got the one that was originally sold at a 7-Eleven or the one that was originally sold at their local comic book store. This was not like a big deal. And remember, the actual numbers that were in the field at this point, at the start of the direct market era, overwhelmingly the most common books were the ones sold through the direct market. And toward the end of the direct market era, in the 1990s is when Diamond dropped the hammer. And by 2014, it was kind of all over. By 2014, plus or minus a year or two in any direction, at that point, like 1% of the comic books were being sold through anything other than a comic book store. It really is a tragedy for the American comic scene, because when you have to walk to a special purpose store in order to encounter comic books, you make less comic fans. I mean, you really want to find these things at the grocery store, at the 7-Eleven, whatever else, so you can get new readers into the field. But by 2014, and certainly by 2017, when I believe DC dropped out of differentiating these things, basically there were no comic books being sold through the newsstand. So at that point, they stopped making separate barcoded versions for newsstand distribution. Everything was the direct market version. That's all you've got. So if you pick up a comic book today, it will, guaranteed, if it has any kind of barcode at all, if it went through distribution, certainly, it's got an EAN 13 +5. They probably don't bother to say direct market on it, because everything is direct market. And here you go. Anyway, so like I say, things were pretty copacetic on this whole thing. It was just kind of like, okay, it's curious. There's different distributor markings. There's different markings on different comic books throughout the years. If you guys are ever wondering, for instance, you might have had comic books that had like spray paint along the, of some sort along the edges of the comic books in different points. And those were indicative of different processes of how they were distributed and so forth. I mean, there are all sorts of weird little markings throughout comic book history which indicate that this is one that was touched by Curtis Distribution as opposed to Global, as opposed to somebody else, and so forth. So, this is just sort of trivia of the comic book industry. Nobody gave a crap until, call it 15 years ago, when a large comic retailer, who, and I'm going to provide a little bit of context on this one, because I'm going to admit it shapes my thinking. Now, we've been doing the comic books thing for 33 years coming up on now. His comic base. I guess we're in our 33rd year. God help us. But we've seen a lot of things over the years, and for the most part, we just want to make it easy to catalog your collection, figure out its value, move on with your life, and get down to the enjoyment of actual the comic books themselves. But through that time, I've noticed that there's a lot of different people who are involved in the buying and sell of comic books, and there are a lot of people who are just like, hey, I just want to, I want to buy it for less than I'm selling it. I'm going to make you a fair deal when you bring your collection to me. I'm going to mark it up somewhat so it covers my cost and my carrying costs, so forth, and I'll make enough profit to keep the whole thing going. But then there's always, let's call them the Sharpies. The guys who aren't satisfied with that one. They're always looking for an angle to make things extra super special. And one of the folks with a long history of being a Sharpie, let's just say, big retailer out of the western portion of the country, and he's innovated several interesting marketing techniques of adding value to your comic books as you go. He very famously started, he had at one point, wagered pretty much all of his money as a relatively young man, buying a collection from a guy named Edgar Church, who had a fine collection of Golden Age books that he'd kept very well, which was rare for the time. So he had some of the nicer copies that anyone had ever seen of Tales from the Crypt and early Supermens and things like that. Now, this is a great find, right? I mean, if I found an old guy who'd actually taken care of his comic books and I wagered everything I had in order to buy his collection, yeah, absolutely. I mean, I'm going to sell these things for everything that their grade is worth and so forth. But this guy went a little further. He invented a new concept in comic retailing called the pedigree, which you might think, if we're talking about the pedigree of a comic book, we might be thinking, well, was this owned by the 11th Earl of Mar? Was King Charles himself the owner of this comic book? No. He was just a member. He just said, look, this is just such a special set of comic books that I don't want the value of just the grade itself on this thing. No, it's also a member of the blah, blah, blah collection. He named it the whole thing. Now, he managed to actually sell the Overstreet Price Guide on this concept of treating them, I'm not going to name his shop. He doesn't need any more publicity. But of treating the particular copy he bought as somehow more special than any other copy in the same grade owned by anybody else. And, in a way, you kind of got to kind of give him props for this whole thing. Because if you can convince someone that the copy I have is more unique than any other one in the same case, well, in a way, you've added value to the product, right? And so if someone will pay you more for it, who am I to judge that this is a bad thing to do? Now, this guy stood on the board of the Overstreet Price Guide advisors. Now, the Overstreet Price Guide, huge in the industry, and it deservedly so. This was the first guide to ever try to catalog all the comic books that had ever been published in America. It really didn't get into world comic books so much, but tried to come up with the scholarship of where were the guys who did the really good inking, where were the guys who did the really good covers, the classic covers, the first appearances of different characters and so forth. So Bob Overstreet, we can't pay him back for his contributions to the field. He's an absolute legend. But one problem he has is once you've discovered a whole bunch of comic books over time, you have a problem of trying to figure out the value for them all. And in the very early days of doing ComicBase, we actually were in talks with Bob Overstreet to try to license his guide. And at that point, he was in the business of selling it to Steve Jeppy of Diamond Comics, and it got complicated. It's it didn't go anywhere. I wound up having a very strange meeting with Steve Jeppy in his office where he's having to shove and I think it's a Superman number 8. It was either Action 8 or Superman number 8. But he had to literally drop it off of his desk into a pile of very valuable Golden Age comic books in order for me to put my laptop down, so I could show, demo the product to him. He's showing me the early version of Diamond Galleries and so forth. And toward the end of the meeting, he was just kind of I don't know, computer stuff. And, he forwarded me to his tech guys and, to try to get their evaluation on whether this computer thing was ever going to amount to anything. And honestly, things bogged down so much that by the time he was ready to talk again, we'd moved on, because we had the problem at that point of trying to figure out, at that point, we actually asked him, so, okay, if we're going to talk about licensing your data, how many books are we talking about here? I mean, is it 20,000, 30,000? And the answer from the Overstreet Price guy is, we don't actually know because it's in a word processing file. It's not in a database, which actually not a lot different today. But anyway, I mean, you got to realize how different the field was back in the time. Anyway, so, but the Overstreet Price Guide had a problem of how do we figure out the values for all these things. And what they would do, their answer to it was, we'll have a series of advisors from all across the country, people who run big comic stores, and they can send us in where they think the pricing action is. We did something similar in the early days of ComicBase, where I would go around with notebooks to every comic show, every convention, and every comic store in the Bay Area I could get to, and sit there for an afternoon and just write down prices, so I could get a sense for where things were going. And eventually, things like eBay came along. I didn't need to leave my house as much in order to write down prices, but it was definitely, we eventually partnered up with Comics Buyer's Guide and to split the work of trying to price out the world's comic books. But it was just incredible numbers of things to deal with, and you're dealing with a very limited set of data to figure out what's hot, what's not. I mean, just because I saw a comic book going for either a higher price than I expected or a lower price than I expected at a particular comic book shop, was that a one-off? I mean, or maybe that's really a sign of a new trend. You don't really know these things until you see it a bunch of times. Well, anyway, this is kind of like the state of the art back in the 90s, and I noticed at one point there was you've got, I don't know, 30 or so Overstreet advisors, which were forming his guide. And I noticed one day, it's like, because I'm very interested in pricing at this point, that all the junky Marvel reprint horror titles of the day, Where Monsters Dwell, Creatures that, and so forth, basically things that reprinted their not very much loved 1950s output, which they were putting out, for like 25 cents, whatever else. I mean, they didn't sell particularly well, so whatever else. But all of a sudden, these comic books went from being like $2 comic books you could find anywhere to suddenly they were like $35 for like a rando issue of Where Monsters Dwell. Happened. I mean, it's a huge. It was like a 10-time or 20-time increase in the price of this, all the lines for the whole thing. And read with great curiosity the Overstreet guide report of, well, what's going on with that? I mean, have these all been optioned for movies? I mean, is there something going on with the whole thing? No, it's just based on reports from comic retailers, especially those people out in the large comic retailers out west who are on their board, had suddenly decided that no, these things were hidden gems, and oh my God, their customers couldn't get enough of them. But it's kind of funny is that if you have the ear of the folks writing the pricing guide and you can convince them that everything's worth 10, 15 times what they were worth 2 minutes ago, which might coincide with when, not saying, but it might possibly be after you've just bought a whole bunch of them for the same $1 or $2 each that we were all buying them for. If you could then convince someone that they're worth 15, 20 times that, well, then you would stand to make quite a bit of profit, wouldn't you? Well, so these kind of market vacillations were things that you could definitely look askance at and say, hey, what's this really based on? Because I went to another place, or I can go into a different shop who hadn't gotten the new Overstreet price guide yet, and I can still keep buying these things for $1 and $2 each. But then once the new price guide comes out, once people come in there and say, oh my God, these things are like, they're on fire, they're worth 30 times, then all of a sudden the shop owner, if he values his inventory at all, will go get out his sticker gun and start re-stickering all his crappy 1970s Marvel, reprint monster titles and so forth, and a trend is born. Now, this kind of thing kind of started to go away when the internet came around, because you couldn't just invent data points as easily. You couldn't just be like, based on my say-so, this thing is now hot. So then one day, fast forward, and again, we're talking about the same guys here doing the same kind of move, the same people who invented the pedigree, the same people who are Overstreet price guide advisors for some fairly radical, price changes and so forth. One day he writes an article in his newsletter and publishes it out and to his customers and says, hey, remember those newsstand editions? The barcodes were different and so forth. Well, I've looked into it because we have computers now, and I have decided that basically, despite the fact that the early newsstand editions were 10 times more common, in real life. I mean, there were 10 times more of them, than there were of the direct market editions. It turns out that pretty much everyone who ever, bought a comic book at the 7-Eleven pretty much wadded it up in the back of their pocket, abused it. It got ruined on the spinner rack because kids with sticky hands from all the Slurpees were reading it and so forth. And so we never see these in, never, ever, ever see these in top condition. No, it turns out that, the direct market copies, the ones you bought through your comic store, every single one of those, on the other hand, was stuck in a plastic bag and board and treated lovingly by someone with air-conditioned, dry storage that was cool and very conducive to the weathering of paper. And so I've discovered a new trend. My new trend that I have discovered just now, based on data, which I will not actually show, is that yes, the newsstand versions are actually worth 4, sometimes 8, sometimes more than the direct market versions of this exact same comic. So suddenly that copy of let's throw it up on the screen here again, Captain America, what is this? What we're looking at here, number 237. So, I mean, if I've got the direct market one, the one with the slash on it, that thing's garbage. Yeah, I mean, that thing's worth like $3, just like you knew it was. But if you got the newsstand version of that one, $15 easy. I'm just throwing numbers out there at random, but this is the kind of thing that, was being postulated. Now, this got a lot of attention. It caused people to kind of say, wonder which one I've got, and so forth. But for the most part, it didn't really take for a really long time. But he kept on banging on about it. Other people started getting in on it. And one thing that's really kind of wild about being a position to be the owner of the price guide or to have the ear of a lot of people is sometimes you can actually move the market. So in other words, if I can convince everyone that my copy of this thing is the cool, special, rare one, after a while, it almost becomes a self-fulfilling prophecy because people will suddenly say, hey, as I'm filling in my Captain America comic book collection over here, I only want to buy the newsstand editions because I hear the newsstand editions are the cool ones. And so then everyone who's selling Captain America comic books, who's never bothered to break out which was the newsstand, which was the direct market, whatever, because people buy, they sell, collections come and go and so forth. Everything kind of gets aggregated, but suddenly were forced to disaggregate all the ones that had the barcode, or those were the special ones all of a sudden. And also because there's a lot of hype around the whole things, suddenly the barcode one, you could see people starting to have a marked preference for it. So no one really knows. I mean, really, I've never seen anything, even slightly related to authoritative data to go with the thing being postulated, which is that the newsstand one is the rare one. But over time, it kind of got to be the case that was the one that people who cared would care about, and they would start demanding it. Now, we have polled this question amongst our users at different points, and we've watched the whole thing. And I'm going to say numbers that seem to come out there is 70 to 80% of the collecting market could care less. I mean, for the most part, let's face it, we're talking for the most part about comic books that run $3, $5, $6. I mean, do you want to go to war over this kind of thing? And do you really care? And for most of 2 out of 3 or more people, they really don't. But that 1 out of 3, 1 out of 4, 1 out of 5 people, they care, and they care a lot because they think this is the golden ticket, baby. And it's also it plays to this weird thing that we've all got going in the comic industry, or really any collectible industry, which is, hey, if I've got the special knowledge about what the cool one is, I can make a killing because this putz over here doesn't know this is the cool one. I'll buy the cool one. I'll sell it in the market to the people who know that's the cool one, and I'll make a big amount of money. I will buy low, I will sell higher, and so forth. I will repeat the magic that was formed so many years before in so many different methods by any number of Sharpies in the industry. And it's a hard one to turn down because on way, if you've got a little bit of knowledge, it looks like free money. Now, this is a weird one here because we're in the market, we're the comic industry, we're database guys. We don't care about page counts. We're not limited by anything. We can easily put any number of entries in our database that makes any kind of sense to our users. And there was really nothing stopping us from embracing this trend. We were encouraged to at different times during the whole thing, but we had decided at various points, we're not gonna. And our guide in this one goes back to actually the Overstreet price guide, once again, where they, first of all, had decided they weren't going to embrace this trend. Sorry, I'm looking at the focus here. I want to see if I can make it a little better. That is terrible. Nope, now it's really bad. Okay. It's a little sharper now. Okay, we'll go with that. Sorry about that, guys. But anyway, we had various times in the whole thing where we said, look, is this helping collectors in general, or is this just like playing into a weird little grifter trend that we're not sure we want to endorse? And we kind of held fire on this one for a very long time because we're thinking, grifter trend, really don't want to jump in on it. Now, we could have very easily, I mean, on one hand, it's like, I'm obsessed with having database numbers. I mean, having the biggest database is like a cool thing for us. And we could have added tens of thousands of new variants very, very easily by simply spinning out all the newsstand variants of all these comic books over the years. But it seemed like if you did that, you'd be causing a whole lot of grief for your customers who suddenly would have to go back, figure out, well, which one do I have? And everything I've entered with my collection beforehand, is it now wrong? Do I have to go re-inventory everything? And we're thinking, yeah, we're not going to jump on this trend very hard, especially look, Overstreet's not jumping in on it. The responsible adults in the industry don't seem to be embracing this one. It's like one grifter guy with a bunch of comic books out there, some guys on eBay, and then increasingly, and then some online guides. And then the world changed on us. And I got some bad news in the last couple of weeks, which changed, let's call it the state of play of where the stuff is, which is to say, starting in 2022, so just a couple of years ago, all the major grading companies decided that in their quest to have a new thing to sell, they were selling specialty labels for their for their grades and things like that. But their new thing they were going to sell is, we're going to start go ahead and differentiating out the newsstand versions anyway, because it seems like people are getting excited about this one. There might be some action on it, and it might cause people to go and resend their stuff in for grading again. But now we will certify that this is now the official newsstand version or the official direct market version, and we can get some action on that. And CGC, PGX, and CBCS have all at this point endorsed this trend. Pretty much all the online price guides have gone in on this one. It became something for the folks over at the Grand Comics database, who honestly have never met something they couldn't index the hell out of. Which, I mean, you got to respect that. They of course had launched on this one ages ago. But increasingly it got to be one of those things where like, wait a minute, it seems like we're some of the last guys out here not jumping on this trend. We're getting increasing, hassle from folks saying, hey, when are you going to start separating out the newsstand ones and so forth and so forth. And I was doing some work to actually work on make it easier to import data from other people's systems. And I'm realizing, oh my God, these guys have really polluted their data just up, down, and sideways by separating out all the newsstand trends, which we're treating as indistinct. And if you were the kind of person who actually took the time and separated your stuff into newsstand and not newsstand versions, we actually were a problem where we couldn't import your data without mischaracterizing a lot of it. So that's a problem for us, because we would like to certainly make it always easy to move into ComicBase from wherever you're using. And so it's like, we're gonna have to look into this again. And what I did is I said, okay, well, let's again check the state of play. I was not super happy to hear that the grading companies had recently thrown in with this trend. But then I called over to our partners over at Heritage Comics, and they're like, so, hey guys, what are you doing with newsstands? They're like, yeah, we don't really play around with it much, but for individual copies, if people ask, yeah, we list them sometimes as newsstand. And so it's like, okay, well, there's that. And I called the buddies over at Overstreet. We picked up the latest copy of Overstreet, and it does not list newsstands for that matter, barely list variants at all, which, as we all know, variants are pretty much the entire game now in the comic industry. Not making it a better world or anything, but it's definitely a problem. But Overstreet is limited by page count. And so because they want to conserve their page count and not publish the Overstreet price guide as a 48 volume set of books, what they were doing with Newsstand editions was just kind of ignoring them and hoping they went away. But that was not dispositive for us. So, I did talk to their print guy, and that's kind of his take on the whole thing. But he also admitted that, yeah, and we also can't really cope with variants in general right now. They're driving us nuts. And he sounded super, super unhappy. Partly he's unhappy because he's also part of Gemstone Publications, which is associated with the Diamond Comics, which is not in great financial shape right now, as you guys probably know. So things are not great over in that neck of the woods. But he also suggested I get a hold of their database guy, and I did get a hold of him, and we chatted for a bit. And he's admitting that, yeah, Newsstand, we're adding them to the database on an as people bitch basis, which is okay. So I'm looking around, and my general theory on all this stuff is, look, if I gotta take the hit, I'd rather take the hit hard, fast, and get it done with. But I'm looking around at the state of play at this point in the market, and I'm thinking, we cannot hold the waves back anymore. We can't be the one little guy with his finger in the dike at this point. And so we have got to embrace or capitulate, however you want to put it, to the idea of treating the Newsstand comics as different than the regular comics in a meaningful way, which means that we are now going to have to roll out, as it turns out, 48,328 new variants into the ComicBase database. And I'm not in love with this. I'm just gonna pause right now and say that. Let me just take a quick look at this the chat that's been rolling by as I've been talking here. Let's see here. Pedigrees. I'm gonna have to get back to this because otherwise I'm gonna completely lose my thought here, because there's a lot to talk about there. So, anyway, as far as I can tell, we don't have a choice on this one anymore. It is something that we actually polled our users again on this one, and by basically 3-1, in one version, the poll came back as only 2-1. Y'all don't even want in the program. It's a distraction. It's not a good thing to add. I wish it didn't exist. But that 1 out of 3, 1 out of 4 that does want it, wants it very badly. We actually met people who said, yeah, look, I stopped using your program because you wouldn't separate out the Newsstand versions. And this, of course, does not make us happy. We like everyone to like our program and do things like that. But at the same time, you don't want to add a feature that pisses off 3 times as many people as it makes happy. So we have a little bit of a problem on our hands, don't we? So it comes down to basically 2 questions. Do we join join the rest of the crew and treat Newsstand's editions as significant and separate than regular ones? Our answer until now has been no, and increasingly it seems like it must be yes. And then the second one is like, well, then what the hell do we do about it? And then what the hell do we do about it is the subject of the rest of this little talk here. And by the way, thank you for hanging with me. I realize this gets into the deep weeds in a big way. All right. So what the hell do we do with number one? So number one, if we would like to continue as a business, we cannot make it so that you regret your life choices having used our stuff to inventory your program, up to this point. I mean, the biggest single investment we have with our computers is the time we spent putting data into them. It isn't the computer themselves. It isn't our big flashy monitors. It's not the cost of the software. It's our time. So one thing we cannot do at this point is make it so that all your data is suddenly wrong because we decided to make everything a variant for, as it turns out, a period of like 25 years. It's a really long period of time. It's again 48,000 and change new issues. So one thing we are definitely not going to do is ask you to go back in time and re-inventory all of your collections in order to accommodate the presence of these Newsstand variants. So how are we going to do this then? All right. Well, first of all, remember the whole thing starts with very, very dubious basis for why would you even care. But what happens is the market has boiled down these circulation numbers and the theory of the destruction of all the Newsstand versions and so forth. They boiled it down to sort of a market shorthand, which kind of comes down to the Newsstand one is the cool one. And it doesn't even matter if you're talking about a newsstand version in 1979, when the newsstand version was the dead common one, or the newsstand version in 2009, where you might never be able to see a newsstand version. It might not have ever actually been published outside of like 2 places. That one might be rarer than rare. But the market, in terms of the resale market, in terms of like how the values of these things go, isn't particularly interested in this one, because they're buying the same narrative that's been put out by the same guy who pushed the trend in the first place, which is to say the newsstand version's the cool one. Now, we, in terms of pricing, are incredibly agnostic. I don't care what anything costs myself, because I'm not here to make money off of selling you stuff other than accurate information on the value of your comics. So for us, what we're going to be doing when we add newsstand versions, the whole thing is we're going to create, okay, I guess this came out in a direct market and a newsstand version. They're going to start at the same price. And at that point, the same magic that makes the entire comic-based price guide work will work and tell us what is going on with these. I suspect for the vast majority of these sudden new variants, nothing much will happen. The $3 comic book, the $3 Captain America 317 will probably be the $3 newsstand version of Captain America 317. Probably nobody cares very much. But sometimes people will care, and then that will, over time, because they're now treated as 2 separate items, not just one item, they will have their own price trends. In other words, market data, what people have them for sale at and what people sell them for, will start probably moving the prices one way or another. Now, I don't need to particularly care which way they go, but for the purposes of not making everyone crazy, we have to look at the current market and say, well, again, everyone has boiled this down to the shorthand of the newsstand one is the cool one. So this is the one thing that allows us to do this move at all. Because if it was ambiguous, if half the time the newsstand was the cool one and half the time the market, direct market one was the cool one, and people were seeing wildly different, market, prices one way or the other, I got to tell you, I would never touch this thing, because again, I'm not going to ask everyone who's ever put a comic book in ComicBase to go back and re-examine it and see, was it variant A or variant B for something that no one ever treated as distinct until 5 minutes ago. That would be madness. It would make everyone nuts. So what we're doing is, it comes down to is this: we're going to blow in 48,328 new variants, which are the newsstand versions of all the comic books that were published by Marvel, DC, and later possibly Image. The Image thing's really murky about how many of these really existed on newsstand versions. We can find examples of Spawn, but we're not finding a lot of other examples. But for Marvel and DC between that era, what's going to happen is they're going to suddenly grow. You'll see like a Captain America 237. There will suddenly be a Captain America 237/NS. NS is newsstand. You'll also, in ComicBase, when you boot up, if you don't already have a newsstand variation, there will suddenly be a newsstand variation. And that'll be created automatically. Now, okay, let's say you've got all your Captain Americas entered into ComicBase right now. And so what if I don't want to go back and re-enter them? Nothing. Everything's fine. And everything's fine because of, again, the market conceit that the newsstand one is the cool one. For the tiny, it's not a tiny minority at this point. It's now just a minority. It's a significant, like harder to ignore minority, but a minority of people who actually care. What happens is, if you promise them a newsstand version, but you give them a direct market version, they get mad at you. If you promise them a direct market version, but you give them a newsstand version, they're like, haha, bonus for me. And again, most people, if you promise them one thing and give them the other one, do not care in the slightest. But because the bias goes only one way at this point, here we can actually get away with saying, all right, fine, we'll make it so the newsstand version is the special one. And so if the newsstand version is the special one, so if it takes effort to move your copy into the newsstand version, so you go back over your old Spider-Man, your old Captain Americas, you say, aha, I've got one with the 2-digit barcode at the end. At that point, you can go ahead, move it into the brand new variant over there, and maybe it's worth more, maybe it's not. My guess is for the vast majority of them, it probably is worth almost exactly the same as the other one before it. But in some cases, and especially when you get to things like the first appearance of Venom, Marvel Superhero Secret Wars #8, right? The first appearance of the Venom costume. the black Spider-Man costume. He wasn't officially Venom at that point. But if you get there, yeah, at that point, there's actually no arguing with the fact that the newsstand version is commanding more money. It's There are a few other famous versions like that one where people are really making hay about the fact that, oh no, the newsstand version way better at this point. So yeah, the belief, whether it's based on truth or not, of thoughts of what the scarcity is, it doesn't matter at this point, because if the market becomes that whole thing, at a certain point you just got to go with the market. Is kind of where we're at. So what do you do? So suddenly there will be all these new variants in ComicBase. You, again, can safely ignore them. And one thing that we're also going to be doing in ComicBase is we're going to be adding a brand new filter. Right now, there's some filters right in the program where you say what you want to view. You can say, do you want to view all issues? Do you want to view owned issues, just the things that are in your stock? Or there's a kind of a split the difference one, which is view only owned and regular issues, which is to say, don't show me every damn variant in the place, but if I happen to own the variant, show it to me. So it takes down the clutter of the list. Well, we're talking about adding an enormous amount of new clutter to the list. And if you look at some other programs that have added variants everywhere, sorry, I'm trying to think of a polite term for, it's a show involving things you don't want. Yeah. Anyway, there's going to be a brand new filter in ComicBase, which will arrive at the same time that these variants arrive, which is to say explicitly on top of all that, do you want to show or not show newsstand variants? So if you're one of the majority of people who do not care about this whole thing, the very first thing you'll get when we launch that version of ComicBase is you'll launch the program. You'll be greeted with a message that says, hi, there's newsstand variants been making a lot of news lately. We've decided to support them in the program because that seems like what the market's doing. But do you personally want to treat them, do you want to see newsstand versions in your version copy of the program? And if you say no, or frankly, even if you say yes, if you say no, all those new /NS variants don't appear. They just won't. Your program will look the same as it ever did. If you're looking down at your list of Spider-Man from the 200s era, you'll see nice sequential issues just like they were up until we went back and started reprinting and making new variants and facsimile editions and all that stuff. But you won't have all the clutter in your life if you don't want to deal with it. And it'll also show you, and by the way, if you change your mind, there's this new little widget at the bottom of the screen. You just click on that thing over there and you can flip the setting and you can see the newsstands or not see the newsstands, whatever you want. And so we can take the crud out of your life if you just don't want to play. And again, just don't want to play is the majority position of most comic book collectors. But let's say you do want to play. At which point, then it's going to be easy to add these things. They will have their own self-sustaining pricing curves, which again will be driven by market activity. This also means, by the way, if we support it, that means Atomic Avenue supports it. And so suddenly all these things will be saleable on Atomic Avenue, which means they will get listed at various prices. They will get sold at various prices, and the market will do whatever the market does with them. And so we will have pricing data based on real stuff that tells you what these things do. Now, again, if you don't want to go back over your old collection and go hunting for newsstand editions, let's flip through all of them and see if we can find the one with the 2-character, digit barcode on the end. You don't have to, because in the current state of things, at least for now, no one gets mad at you if you didn't promise them a newsstand edition and you give them one. Again, most people don't care at all, but the surprises only go in one direction. Now, you might potentially lose out on some money you might make if you don't go back and see if yours is one of the cool variants. Kind of like, if you guys ever remember the old magazines of like coin collecting, it's like, do you have this one penny? And it looks like every other penny in your pocket, except it was the one printed at the other mint, not the Denver mint. And in one particular year, there was a production problem. So if you've got the one from the other mint and it has the one little squiggle at the bottom of the whole thing, you went from having a 1 cent piece in your pocket to having like something that's worth like $10,000. So it might be worth your effort to go back and stare at the little squiggles on your things, and maybe you will pick up some extra money on the whole thing in terms of the value of your collection. But nothing's guaranteed. Honestly, most people in the field don't care about this phenomenon. But for the people who do care, they might be willing to pay more for the newsstand versions. So this gives you a way of realizing this. So that's kind of where we're coming down on this whole thing. Now, I've been talking a very long time, and this is a very controversial topic, so let's start reading comments. All right, scrolling way the hell back here. And let's see here. Okay, this is the people saying things. Okay, so, all right. Okay, matching things. We'll get to the matching thing later on. So, all right, what do I look at for the new cover picture if the director have a newsstand? Oh, yeah, this is fun for us too. So, question came up there is, all right, so right now we have pictures and we only have one picture for all the books, and suddenly there's going to be all these versions that have our picture, which we didn't care. It could have been the newsstand, it could have not been the newsstand version. Suddenly we have to care which picture's right. Well, this is where the fun for our editors comes in, because they're going to have to review 6,600 titles, going down the list and figure out which ones that does our stock picture, which our stock picture is the one right now that we had the biggest picture of in our library, and they're going to have to look at each one of those pictures, of those titles, look down the ranges in question, 48,000 comics, and say, oh, is the picture we've got for the quote unquote now wrong version? Because if it's not, all the newsstand ones will initially will have no pictures on them because it's a brand new variant and there's no variants in our picture library that are /NS right now. But if they are in there, if our regular version is actually turns out the newsstand version, they've got to go in there, spot it, swap the name of the picture, put it out there as a brand new picture. You guys will get it in your picture update and so forth, and then we'll have to go and find the picture for the regular edition, the direct market edition on that one. Will it suck? Well, for our editors, absolutely. And I'm hoping I don't get too many resignations in the next couple weeks on this one, because I don't want to do the work myself. But that is something that our guys are going to have to do. They're going to get a little bit of a jump on this one before you guys are exposed to this whole thing. The schedule for us rolling all this out is basically, we're thinking this week's update isn't due out till Friday. We're looking to introduce this one the Friday after that one. So internally, we'll have something like 10 days to start scrubbing the major titles and start pulling out the really embarrassing ones and take them out of there, and hopefully also start filling in the pictures that, anything we move out, start backfilling in the direct market pictures. We also need to wipe down the pictures on Atomic Avenue for the ones so that, people suddenly who care about this newsstand stuff will see a picture of the newsstand one when they think they're buying the newsstand one, and we start sorting out all this nonsense on that end. But I expect it's going to be an ongoing problem for us. What it's going to largely be is we're going to auto-populate a bunch of these things. We'll swipe the barcodes over. Like, for instance, we know that if the barcode format it's called UPC-A +2, which is to say a 12-digit code with a 2-character supplemental on the end of it. If we've got that in our database attached to a regular issue, we know to move that over into the newsstand version. So a lot of issues that we have from the period that we've got, the short barcode that you would use on a newsstand version, that one's going to get moved over. ComicBase actually allows you to have more than one barcode for something, so we're going to sift those out. I think for later comic books where they might have both formats of barcode on the whole thing, we're basically going to separate those out programmatically. So the short UPCA one will automatically get moved into the newsstand edition, and whereas the other one can still be found by its regular EAN +5, EAN 13 +5 barcode. That'll happen, but there's going to be a lot of backfilling that we're going to need to do, and certainly we will very much hope that if you guys can help us out with user submissions on this one, especially if you're one of the folks who cares about this, please. At this point, and I realize we've been pissing off some people for a while by not taking your newsstand submissions, because again, the editorial policy of both Overstreet and ourselves has been to treat them as if they were identical. But this is a big change of direction for us, and I figure if you got to change course hard, get it done, rip the Band-Aid off. And so I think this is a rip the Band-Aid off moment, but yeah, we'll be filling in and fixing data for a while. If you see later on, one thing that we don't have a really nice automated way to handle is if you submit a new picture, if it's got a higher resolution than the one we've got already, it automatically gets sent in, and that gets very easily added. But if for some reason you've got a picture of, like, say, a newsstand version, or for that matter of a newsstand picture that's of one of the old direct market versions that isn't as big as the wrong one, it's now wrong, the picture that we had beforehand, and you can't, at that point, please do message support@comicbase.com. Say, look, here's a better picture for you, and they can add that in manually. But the easy way to go on these things is if you simply scan it at a higher resolution than the one we've got, then it upgrades the picture, and then we put that in as a matter of course. But we expect that over the next period of months, we will have flushed out all the relevant issues on these things from Marvel and DC and gotten those squared away. But there's going to be some time when, you're looking at the newsstand version and you're looking at a direct market barcode or vice versa, and that's going to be just something we're going to have to work it out because, again, it's a big change of direction. All right. Somebody also pointed out that, hey, you're treating the newsstands as the variants. What about, so when you're looking at, old titles and everything, is direct market, is that now Fantastic Four #1? Is that now the direct market variant? No, that's just the regular old direct, Fantastic Four #1. Until it became relevant to, differentiate between newsstand and direct market, the truth is newsstand was the standard. And if we don't have a variant after it, it just means it's the regular old one, which the meaning of that is that, effectively is it was the newsstand one for the early years of things, and once the newsstand market collapsed around 2017 or so, then the regular old, if it doesn't have a variant code after it one, is going to be the direct market one. Now, conveniently, as it turns out, by the time Marvel stopped printing different newsstand variants on their whole things, at that point the variant craze had taken over so thoroughly that it isn't like it goes back to regular numbering and everything's good. No, at that point every damn thing's a variant, and so it kind of becomes just lost in a sea of variant mush at the end. But for anyone whose head kind of hurts at the idea of we're differentiating the newsstands as a variant for things published after 1979, I sympathize with you, but I don't have an alternative that doesn't wreck everybody else's database. So it's a little bit awkward in terms of economy of numbering, but it's probably the only thing that can be done, unless we're going to go back in time and say, hey, everyone, just check out your software, check out all your databases, reinventory everything over again. It'll be fine. That's not a solution. So what this is doing is it just says, look, if it doesn't show a special variant, it's the regular old edition, whatever that means. And if it's newsstand, it means it's the newsstand version. So if I didn't explicitly say it's the newsstand version, it means it's just the regular old one. But yes, I absolutely absolutely sympathize with that. Let's see here. Okay, so other questions on that? I think we've covered the direct market thing from now. Don't mess with the moderator. Yes, of course. All right. It says hi from Toronto. Let's see. All right, some more stuff. Okay, direct market started in 76 or 77. Yeah, it's Marvel got started on the direct market before anyone else did. I've got the dates on this one. I want to say it's something like October of. Well, direct market. Yeah, it's weird because they didn't start printing different versions. They didn't catch on to the scam for a while. I think originally they were just publishing the same old one, but then eventually, even though there was a direct market, people were pulling some nonsense and trying to return them. So they didn't get to the point where there's separate newsstand direct market editions. The earliest I'm finding is, I think, 79 for Marvel and 80 for DC. But if you have information that's different than that, please let me know. All right, let's see here. And so, yeah, we talked about the cover scans on that. Got that. Okay, let's see. All barcodes should be placed on the back cover. Yeah, it's some people put barcodes on the front, some people put it on the back. That's actually an interesting aesthetic point of view. Is and it's funny because when you read literature on which one to prefer, a lot of customers are like, hey man, I like the direct market one because it doesn't have the big old barcode wrecking my artwork on the front, unlike the newsstand one, which had that. So if you look at, say, Spawn #1, it's a prettier cover if you have the direct market copy, as opposed to the relatively rare newsstand edition. So c'est la vie. All right, let's see here. Thomas B, welcome. He's back. Let's see. And we talked about marking on this stuff. Large diamond books. Sorry, I'm sort of scanning this whole thing. Let's see. K Bruno says, K Bruno says, I spent 6 years looking for the last Batman Volume 1 newsstand post Whitman books I did not have. Number 582. Finally found last week. Just got the last Whitman book I didn't have too. Wow. Okay. I'm glad. I'm glad you got what you want. I mean, at the end of the day, we would like to get the things we want. All right. Let me see. Is people talking about weather? Kilometer high comics. Let's see. Yeah, I don't. It's funny because the guy who's been pushing a lot of the stuff has no problem making it personal with me, and I'm just don't want to sink to that. So anyway, let me see here. Any update for the ComicBase phone app? Yeah, I gotta say, the ComicBase phone app is the number one thing I've been working on, and it's gotten a little bit shoved back due to this this factor. So we've added in some new auto matching type stuff that I want to do. So on an unrelated issue, which we're going there. If you've been downloading preliminary builds of ComicBase, you might have noticed that there's a new option under when you're downloading updates to automatically see if you can fix unknown issues. And if it does that one, what it will do is, if you guys ever download an update and you see this little blue item appear at the end, say, hey, look, we couldn't find some of your issues. Some of your issues in your database aren't what we know them as. And what it does is, it was an effort to try to automatically fix that using their barcodes. Barcodes and exact title and name matches. So typically, if something was in the database and suddenly you download an update and suddenly it's listed as unknown, typically one of two things happen. One is it got solicited under one name, but then when it actually shipped, it turns out the name was slightly different. Pellucidar across the Savage Seas, or Pellucidar across Savage Seas. It got solicited one way, and it turned out the actual title was something else. So in those cases, one thing that really helps, as it turns out, is if we have the barcode in both places. If we had, you had it in your collection, and it's, it has barcode, whatever, EAN13 plus 5. But it turns out there's only one other place where this unknown item exists in the database, and it's under this other title with the exact barcode. Well, then in theory, this should be like a 99.9% chance match of, yep, that's exactly what happened to the whole thing. And so what we'll do is we'll say, okay, great, we can move the obsolete item into its official designation. We'll log the change. You'll say, okay, yeah, this was moved over there. And suddenly the thing drops off of your unknown items list. It gets priced properly and everything's happy and you don't need to worry about it. We've had some really good luck on this one, by and large. We've actually gone and taken people's databases. They're like a year old with all the changes that happen over time. Another thing that can happen over time is we'll realize that, for instance, something that was listed as a comic book, turns out it's actually has no comic stories. So it gets listed as a magazine if it's periodical. An example of this would be, say, the official indexes to the Marvel Universe, which, despite being in comic book formats, have no comic stories. So technically, they're not considered comic books by Guinness, and because one of our users is the Guinness World Record holder for biggest comic book collection, we have to respect the definition of Guinness when we are saying what's a comic book, what's not. And so we use, basically it has to be composed of comic book stories, and if it doesn't, it has to be listed as either a book or a magazine. So if it turns out that something was listed as a comic book, and then we find out later on, no, it's just a portfolio, so it's really a book, or it's a periodical index like the official Marvel index and so forth. What'll happen is your old comic book thing will be left there with its inventory. It'll be suddenly an unknown item, but we'll notice, hey, by the exact same name and exact same issue number, we have a series over here that we're listing as a book now, or that's listed as a comic book now. I think your data probably belongs over there, and we can shift it over there automatically for you. Now you can do all this stuff yourself manually if you want, but we found out it's like, yeah, it takes a lot of the hassle out of just sort of like the day-to-day grind of just using the program and so forth. So that auto matching feature is like the last thing I was getting interested in, kind of wrapping up with a bow before turned on to getting back to the phone app. And then we were also trying to help out some users who are coming in from other programs, Cover Price and CLZ and some other hobbyist programs and so forth. And we realized, oh my God, this Newsstand thing has so penetrated those kind of online worlds that we gotta come to some kind of conclusion on this one. And then we called around and we found out that, oh yeah, looks like Overstreet and Heritage are capitulating on this one along with the other grading guys. So it's like, uh-oh. So this one kind of jumped to the top of the pile. So I do look forward to getting back to the mobile app. We have some really cool new stuff coming for it. It's not going to be the same old, but it's this got shoved aside for just a moment. All right, let's see here. Let's see here. Separating. All right, so Department Comics says, for the record, I was collecting and separating the newsstand and direct editions before we started claiming higher values. Oh, well, okay. I mean, it's fair enough. Some people care. And again, we always had the ability to mark them as newsstand if you cared. It's just that without us making them an official entry into the database, you wouldn't get pricing or new pictures or things like that for them. And that would seem like a good, a good compromise for a number of years. But like I say, with all the dominoes falling over on this one, it feels like it's time to make a switch. Let's see. K Bruno says, I've always collected both versions and reprints just because they were different. The joy of completing as far as possible was the drive, never value. Wow. One thing that occurs to me, because I'm looking at series, especially these days, when we looked at like the January totals, and something like 92.7% of all solicited comic books in January, with January cover dates that were US issues, were a variant of one sort or another. So most commonly these days, there is no official non-variant version. There's A versions and B versions and C, so forth. But nobody ever says, yeah, this is the regular version and everything else is the variant. It's gotten so psychotic at this point. I think there's an average of 4 variants for every comic book at this point. But yeah, it's like 92.7% of things were variants. And that, I gotta say, is really taking away a lot of my personal joy of being able to look down. I used to be a big Captain America collector, Daredevil, X-Men, so forth, and you could just say like, yeah, I got every X-Men since '94, and you once upon a time you could say that, because you weren't worried about picking up the reprints, you weren't worried about picking up the stupid store variants or whatever else. You figured as long as I have one issue of each, you could have that sense of completion, like I've done it. And one thing that I gotta say kind of pisses me off about this whole thing is that it takes away that kind of collector nice feeling of, yeah, I've got the whole set, because now, unless you've got it in all the different possible versions it's been in, and I don't know a lot of people who are like publishing geeks. Like, I would love if he ever comes out of retirement or hiding or, day drinking or whatever he's doing these days, if I could meet like the production managers for Marvel and DC, the guys who had to make sure the film got to the press, for all the different variants that they were putting out there for all the years between 1979 and 2018 or so, when they finally said enough of this, which by then they're already putting out 5 versions of every comic anyway. I would love to meet them and talk to them. If anyone's listening to this thing belatedly, please ring me up. I'll put my number on the screen, bbickford@human-computing.com. Drop me a note. I would love to talk to you. But most people are not geeks about the minutia of the publishing. Usually we're geeks about the story, about the artist, about the writer, about what's going on with Spider-Man and so forth. We don't care about, it's like, oh yeah, this is the one that was published through Curtis distribution, not the one that through the lower states that was published through Worldwide. It's like that interests very, very few folks. Now, if you're one of the folks who interests, mazel tov, just collect what you love. But for most people, that's not where our heart is. And so I hate the idea that this thing breaks up the sequencing that makes you feel like, yeah, I've got it. Certainly one thing we did recently is we changed the way our reports work so that when you're scanning out missing issues and things like that, it by default doesn't take variance into account on the whole thing, and so your ranges are now much more complete, and so it's easier to find which one's which and so forth. That was something that people definitely requested a lot over the years, in which we've changed in the last couple of years to make it so it's easier to see just like, where are my holes. But I miss just visually looking down the list and saying, yeah, I got them all, because at this point, when everything's a variant, no one's got the set. And that's, it just, I don't know, it bugs. All right, let's see here. All right. looking at other things. If bigger DB is exciting, then why are we truncating books? No, it does. They do not match the indicia like Marvel True Believers books. It's not. Yeah, I think that's a topic for another live stream. Is how do we what do we do with all the books that are cross-listed 6 different ways till Sunday and so forth? So we have the True Believers reprints of things. Sometimes they're the True Believers series on their own and so forth. Yeah, in ComicBase, one of the things that we've adopted in a number of ways. First of all, barcodes are your friend. But the other thing about that is we also have cross-referencing of books that are listed different ways, where it's really the 5th reprint of Image Comics' Walking Dead #5. So it's probably listed as the 5th reprint under Walking Dead parenthesis Image, but you might also find it when you're looking for the other thing. So yeah, they don't make comic collecting easy these days, do they? All right, so yes, and let's see here. Batman 150, blah blah blah. I'm trying to find conversational threads on these ones here. So yeah, Greg checks this. Gemstone Publications, apparently not part of the New Dime bankruptcy, not listed as one of the assets. That is true. It's part of the wider Jeppy Holdings. I gotta say though, just talking to the guy, the mood on the phone was grim. It's even if you're not part of the companies that is getting shuffled off to Buffalo just now, there are people who are going to move positions, move their jobs, move where they live, move things like that. And so just even if you're not directly getting sold off in the bankruptcy, I gotta say, spare a kind thought for the folks over at Gemstone, because it doesn't sound like so happy over there. Jet says to say it ain't so, Pete. I'm not sure which one I'm not supposed to say so, but I don't know. All right, let's see here. Yes, ComicBase TV. The silver lining for this gets the database close to 2 million issue milestone. Yeah, it's what's going to happen is in about 2 weeks, is the database is going to instantly pick up close to 50,000 new issues, which I gotta say is not super sexy. It's the sexy numbers at this point. We're at one. God, what are we at now? I want to say 1.3 million comic books or am I thinking covers? I think we're just shy of 1.1 million covers in the database. We're going to cross the 1.1 million covers, but I think the next sexy number for comic books, I don't know, 2 million? Is that sexy? I don't know. At some point, even for me, it just gets to be an arbitrarily large number. And then I think the real fun is how do you get this? You can quickly find what you want very quickly. So there's going to be interesting things there. All right. Make it able to not show you like you do with the mature comics. Sorry, Department of Comics, I'm probably missing some of the thrust of some of these things. At some point, we're probably going to have to pick some of this up when I didn't have to check. Kevin Burns said the last DC Newsstand 2016. I've got conflicting information on that one. Steve Dazzler sent that over to me, but I'm definitely interested in, if you have information to send on this sort of thing, please drop me a note at pbickford@human-computing.com. I'll go ahead and put it up on the board again here. But I think I got sent information just this morning. It says they went about a year or so, like I want to say August 2018 was the last one that they found. One thing that is genuinely interesting, if you are an absolute quant on this stuff, is the Newsstand distribution looks like it got spottier and spottier toward the end. So if you actually cared, if these books were worth more than like $4 anyway, it may turn out that having the Newsstand copy of some of these final ones here is just astonishingly rare, of the ones at the end. Ironically, the ones that they were pimping as being the rare ones, the Cap America 187s and things like that, which they were pimping as rare at the beginning, were actually the common ones, unless you further believe, the thing that's always postulated but no one ever offers evidence for, that single thing that was put out over the Newsstand was destroyed. But unless you somehow really have that as an article of faith, that one's, I don't know. I'd say the case for that, I would not put a lot of stock in, but you could say that the case for that Newsstand copies of very late issue Marvel and DCs are legitimately hard to find. But then you have the secondary question of, do I care to find them? Because I mean, supply and demand, I mean, yes, I mean, it's a curve, and so if you have, low, high demand and low supply, typically price goes up. But what happens if you have low demand and low supply, right? So I mean, just because you only had 1,000 copies of the last newsstand edition of Batman or something, maybe nobody cares. If nobody cares, then you're not going to get a lot of money for them. If you can, make people care, if you can get them energized and caring, I mean, if you can, the winning version of this, thing is when you can sit there and again, you take out the ad for, does this penny in your pocket today? And it's, the old one of the 1 cent one with like the mint mark from which wasn't Denver, is how I remember it. It's something that looks like you might have it in your collection right this very minute, but if you went and looked, and as a kid, I remember looking at every penny in the house, saying, maybe I've got the lucky penny. No, of course you don't have the lucky penny, because there were only however many hundred of them made, and they weren't going to be in Minnesota where I was growing up. But if you can get people to care, to differentiate them, then yeah, you could potentially turn it into a marketing thing where you've added a lot of value to that thing. But being scarce without demand to go along with it doesn't actually move the price any. If it's scarce but nobody wants it, it's just another thing people don't want. Or if they can't be bothered to care, between the two versions, then it does what the market did with these newsstand versions for 10, 15 years. It was just people just kind of shrug their shoulders and go, whatever. It's only when these things got to be, where the base price of these ones, there started being some key books of the time, the first Hobgoblin, the first, Venom, the first whatever else. So the price of them started coming up enough, and then people started juicing them even extra by getting them slabbed, getting them CGC'd, and then getting them juiced even more by saying, oh, now it's the newsstand version. So it's like 3 runs at the apple, 3 bites of the apple, as far as like saying my copy is the cool one. If you can get that to happen, and if you can get the rest of the market invested in buying only that one, well then, yeah, you can make some money. Yeah, whether that's a help for the market or not, I'm going to leave as an exercise to the reader. All right, so I think we have questions on the Marvel 2-in-1's works. Okay. See, Steve Dassinger says some newsstand versions go through the last quarter of 2017 per. And it looks like it cut off there. I don't see this, but let's see. Okay. Ed says, that means I have to go through my collection. I recall either newsstand or direct editions not available when entering Bronze Copper Comics. Their report we can run to find them. Yeah, you'll certainly be able to say find me. I mean, you can certainly do it right now and just say find variation equals newsstand, and you can find all newsstands. And if you want to say combine that with find newsstand and quantity is 1 or quantity is not 1, or greater than 1 or not greater than 1, so like I've got it or I don't have it, then that gives you the newsstands or the not newsstands that you own or don't own if you're looking to do something with them. I gotta say, in my own life, I'd say unless I was talking about a particularly key book of the era, again, Marvel Superhero Secret Wars #8 comes to mind. I don't think I'm going to make a big effort to go through my 56,000 books and try to, get an extra $50 out of them by, re-inventorying them all, finding all the newsstand versions, and then, marking them not as the regular Captain America 214, but as the 214/NS. I can't be bothered. If this is something that appeals to you, by all means, go for it. The goal of the scheme that we are going with here is that should you do it, you should be set up for only good surprises if it happens. So if you happen to find a newsstand version with the current conceit of the market that the newsstand version is the cool one, then in theory, it might be worth a little more. Maybe it's worth a lot more. Who knows? But I wouldn't go through them worrying, oh my God, I had it listed as the not newsstand version, and now because I didn't put it as the newsstand version, I'm gypping someone. That is not currently how the market is reading. Now, could it go there later on as things morph? Yeah, I guess it could. So I guess in a way, it's good that we're eventually making this switch. But for me, I got to say, I'm mostly sad for the market because this just adds an enormous amount of friction to being a comic collector. I wish we were still in an era where people treated them as not particularly interesting to differentiate. But it's just not the way it went. So yeah, it's like I figure it's once Overstreet and Heritage and all the grading companies rolled on this one, it's like at that point it felt like it was fait accompli. So all right, let's see. Greg Heck says, I suspect some part of the first heavy metal series also might be Newsstand or not. I think those ones, it's not clear cased enough that I think what we're going to have to do is wait on user submissions to submit those. I think what we're going to do is just frankly as a convenience for everybody is we're going to auto-populate Newsstand variants of the era that they're known to have been published. And at some point, we'll find out that they either no one's ever seen one or we can't substantiate that they exist. And if we ever get, again, if I can ever get a hold of the publishing manager, who'd probably be about the only guy on the planet who could say definitively if somehow he's still got his old production notebooks or whatever he had of what they actually sent to press or not, that might be the only guy who could say substantially that a given Newsstand version does not exist. If so, at that point, we can take out the variant that we auto-populated, which no one's ever found a cover for. I think we're going to go err towards create variants that might not ever have existed as opposed to don't do it, because A, we can hide them instantly. We're going to give you a one-click hide for all the Newsstand crap. So again, if you don't want to play, it just doesn't get in your way. And the other thing is it makes it so that we don't have a real production on our own hands, trying to process information that you guys send us if you submit covers, if you submit data and things like that for the Newsstand versions. Because yeah, we gotta pile up a list of all the barcodes. We gotta do all that stuff in order to get the stuff entered into the database properly. All right, let's see here. Newsstand. Again, the value Newsstand versus direct. It's in theory, it's determined by which is scarce or lower print quality. Realistically, though, it's not. It's it doesn't make any sense unless you assume facts, not in evidence. But what happens is because we're really bad as people of trying to make up gauges for what's the common versus the uncommon one, unless we've got we're staring at a list of scarcities and things like that, unless we absolutely have a reference saying, yeah, there were 15,000 of these printed and 300 of them are known to survive. If I had that, then I could know which one is worth anything. The problem we've got here is we've got circulation data that says however many hundreds of thousands were made. And then we have stories from people about how many were ever sent in for CGC grading. How many do you have in your inventory over at Acre High Comics? You have stories, but very few people are willing to show their hands and show data, which tells me the whole thing is convenient. And the way the market is processing this one is, again, it just comes down to shorthand, is the Newsstand is the cool one, which maybe it is, maybe it isn't. But if you're treating it like it's the cool one, it becomes the more worth, the higher value one, even if it's easier to find, because people aren't sure. If they were sure, then we wouldn't have this whole thing. But the whole thing is, again, you have a theory that all the ones that were distributed via Newsstand were degraded, destroyed, wadded up, not loved, whatever else, and all the ones that were in the direct market were preserved beautifully. It's a plausible enough sounding theory. I've just never seen anyone offer evidence for it. If you've got evidence, again, would love to see it. I do know that toward the end of the era, the Newsstand version is legit scarce as hell. But also, most people, once they stopped having the Spider-Man versus barcode thing, most people didn't even realize they had two different versions of the barcodes going because they just didn't care. And you're also getting into some serious glut comic books from the 2000s and 2010s that it's hard to sell them, period. And so people weren't going to get really, really worked up about it. Maybe in 30 years, these things will have that kind of patina of respectability that comes with age, because no one was really worked up about the stuff from the 80s back when we were in the 90s. That was the stuff that was like, yeah, okay, it has some good issues of Wolverine and Punisher in there, but no one really cared as long as it was still a $2 and $3 comic book. Now that they're getting to be like 10, 20 bucks, sometimes 50 and up dollar comic books, now suddenly people care. It's the way of the world. All right. Let's see here. Would it be a good assumption that the issue 1-for-1A or no if exists for the DM version for those who have no newsstand version? Yeah, it's what's happening in the modern era. So basically, the NS ones that we're auto creating are explicitly NS. Newsstand. So when you get into the era after, say, post 2005 or so, where it seemed like every damn comic book had started having multiple variants, going on with the whole thing, and we showed that graph at the beginning of the year of variants over time. By the time you get to, like, say, 2005 or so, if memory serves, there was an average of 2 versions of every comic book. Because all the number 1s would come out with like 15 variants, and then the numbers 2s, 3s. By the time you get to number 5, sometimes you actually published just a number 5. But we're not going to try to integrate these into anything other than the NS version. We really do want to keep them distinct on this whole thing, because it really does. It does signal a real sea change in how people are caring or not caring about these things on the market. And we also want to have a one button to turn it off, turn it on for all the people who just don't want to play. So we're not going to treat these as if they're like, if there was A, B, and C versions, we're not going to make this the D version. It's going to be the /NS version. Now, in theory, could you have had multiple newsstand versions of variants? In theory. I'm not sure if I could name you a specific case. If that happens, we're going to have to make that one an E, F, G, whatever else version, in addition to the NS version that we've got going on. But honestly, I think we can case by case those ones as we go. I'm not going to get too worked about that one as we go. The real problem we've got on this one is, what do we do about all the ones through the 80s, 90s, and so forth, where it was just a regular comic book, and then suddenly we're going to pull off the newsstand versus the direct market copies, with the barcode versus not barcode, or the 2-digit barcode versus 5-digit supplementals. We got to handle it somehow, and so that's the strategy we're going to pursue on this one. All right. Batman Volume 3. Growing pains. Yeah. Okay, 500 hours later. Let's see. El Nino. So I'm trying to find conversational threads here. I appreciate you guys have really been commenting a lot of the whole thing. I'm just trying to getting into things. Department of Comments. If you don't want something moved with auto match, just turn off auto match. You don't need to use it. It's a preference. It's just right under update options. Let's see here. Let's see. Finally, acknowledge newsstand versus demarcate. If you'd only consider the Canadian price variant, El Nino, we have the Canadian price variants. They're listed in their own titles. Same thing goes with UK pence versions and so forth. Just look for, if it's Amazing Spider-Man, look for Amazing Spider-Man parenthesis Canadian, and you'll see it. It's not treated as yet another variant under the American version. It's listed under Canadian editions. All right. Let's see here. Let's see. Different promotional things. Sienkiewicz variants. 6. Wow. I think I'm kind of losing the plot at this point. I think we're gonna have to. I hope everyone got their questions answered, or close to. Let me see. Someone say found something that was okay. Got it. All right. I think we are relatively caught up. All right, guys. All right. I think we're going to do this for now. Thank you for all your comments. Thank you for everyone who tuned in on the whole thing. Wish us luck on this thing, and we're going to do the best we can on it. So please, if you guys have more substantive feedback you'd like to reach out to me for, please don't hesitate to write me, pbickford@human-computing.com. But yeah, this is a big sea change for us. And the best thing I can think of is, let's just get it over with. So the schedule as we're going right now is right now I'm testing the code that's auto-populating these ones, and we're trying to nail down what ranges we want to auto-populate and so forth. I think we're going to probably be a little bit conservative. If we're not sure that they're out there, we are probably going to try not putting that out there, but we'll see how we do on that one. But after that, the editors are going to try to do as much of a scrub off of the pictures as we can, of certainly the mainline, Batman, Action Comics, Green Lanterns, all the ones, all the mainstream titles from Marvel and DC that they can get to. They're going to try to scrub as many of those as they can over the next 10 days or so. And so by the time the update comes out, you'll probably see a bunch of new pictures updated. You might see someone's kind of drop off. If we find out that our picture of record was really the Newsstand version, it's going to drop out of our main database. It'll drop off of Atomic Avenue, but we're going to try to replace it. If we aren't able to replace it, certainly if you guys have the Newsstand, the direct market version that you can submit to us, please do. We very much appreciate your help on that one. Again, we have to cope with the sudden emergence of 48,000 new variants. We're going to do the best we can on this one, and hopefully it will not be too disruptive. And also, hopefully, if you just don't want to play, hopefully we don't shock you to death with this whole thing. The idea is that when ComicBase launches, it'll probably be ComicBase 25.6. It's going to launch. You will have a explicit, message will come up on the thing saying, "All right, hey, this is the Newsstand thing," a short version of everything we just talked about for an hour and a half. And basically, would you like to see these, or would you like to hide them? You have one button you click. It will make them essentially go away if you don't like them. It'll show them if you do, and you'll have the ability to toggle that anytime you want by just tapping a control at the bottom of the screen. And at that point, then we're just going to try to square our data away. If you feel like going back and going over your collection and mining for Newsstand versions, if you want to play this game and think the market can support it, go for it. I mean, maybe it's fun for you. I'm personally probably not gonna myself, but certainly it's part of the new lore of comic collecting. Yeah, I guess my main regret on the whole thing is just I'm very nervous about any trend that makes it even harder to be a comic collector, because I think we've done incredible amounts in the last several years to make it so comic collecting is just legitimately hard. And I long for the days when I would go down to Tom Thumb with my 40 cents, or if I had a whole buck from my paper route, I could buy like 2 or 3 comic books out, and maybe even a Slurpee, and you'd be filling in your collections, and that felt pretty damn good. In a way that trying to hunt down every damn variant on the planet for $5 each does not to me. Your mileage may vary, but yeah, I very much would like to make it so that comic collecting is a more approachable sport to more people. And this is the kind of thing that works in the other direction. So we're going to try to minimize the damage. I think we need to support the people who want to do it. I think we need to get out of the way the people who don't want to do it. And try to accommodate it as deftly as we can without adding to the total cognitive load of being a comic collector. So that's our challenge, and wish us luck. We're going to need it. All right, guys, that's about it. Thank you so much. If you like this sort of thing, please hit that subscribe button, hit the notifications. We will have more to talk about this and other things, I'm certain. And I will see you on the next one. Take care. Bye-bye.